In this first module, we will discuss the Buddhist teachings on right understanding. I will first give a quick definition of right understanding in this context, and then explain how it is linked to harmony. Right understanding is the first factor in the Noble Eightfold Path, the path to end suffering. The Buddha placed it first because all other factors in the Noble Eightfold Path need to be guided by right understanding. The Buddha taught that there are two types of right understanding. Right understanding is of two sorts. There is worldly right understanding, leading to merit, resulting in favorable rebirth. There is spiritual right understanding that is noble, a factor in the path leading to enlightenment. If right understanding is worldly, the goal is worldly. For example, doing something meritorious to get a good life now or to get a good rebirth in the next existence. In this case, worldly involves attachment to a good life or an attachment to continued existence. Typically, this is the focus of lay people. The focus of this workshop is on worldly right understanding. If right understanding is spiritual, the goal is to escape rebirth by experiencing enlightenment. Typically, this is the focus of monks. This is not the focus of this workshop. Worldly right understanding is the right understanding of one's personal responsibility for one's deeds. Worldly right understanding highlights the need for ethical conduct. Today's focus is not on enlightenment, rather on harmony, so we will be looking at worldly right understanding. The Buddha discovered a universal moral law and made it the basis for his ethical teaching. This universal moral law is the law of karma. Last year I gave a talk here at BGF titled Clearing Up Misconceptions About Karma. In that talk, I described the Buddha's teachings about karma in great detail. So how does worldly right understanding or karma relate to harmony? Harmony in any community depends on a shared commitment to ethical conduct. Morality is a foundation for harmony. Though people of different faiths may have different motivation for ethical conduct, as long as there is a shared commitment to ethical conduct, there can be harmony. Let me now give an overview of worldly right understanding. According to Buddhism, there is a universal basis for morality that does not depend on human judgment or opinion. In other words, there is a universal moral law, the universal moral law of karma. According to Buddhism, moral judgments are true or false, speech and actions are good or bad, based on a natural universal moral law. This universal moral law, the natural law of karma, covers thought, speech, and action. The natural law of karma is just as universal as the natural laws of physics and chemistry. The implications of the natural law of karma is that to achieve well-being, we must act in conformity with the natural universal moral law, and our personal preferences cannot secure our well-being. The basic principle of karma is that good thoughts, good speech, and good actions bring desirable results, lead to good luck, and are the foundation of a true happiness. The Buddha explained that worldly right understanding was incompatible with the wrong views of karma being promoted by other teachers of his time. Usually, the Buddha talked about his own teachings, but sometimes the Buddha also contrasted his teachings with the messages from other teachers of his time. The first wrong view of karma listed in the suttas is that there is no survival beyond death, no effects of good or bad deeds. The implication of this wrong view is that you should live it up until you die, since after you die there are no consequences for your thoughts, speech, or actions. This is wrong. Another wrong view of karma listed in the suttas is that there is no natural universal moral law, only a man-made law. The implication of this wrong view is that whatever you do is okay as long as it isn't against the law or you don't get caught. The Buddha gave an example of this wrong view. If someone kills the king's enemies, he is rewarded. But if someone kills the king's friends, he is imprisoned. So according to this wrong view, killing can be either right or wrong depending on the king's perspective. This is wrong. A third wrong view of karma listed in the suttas is that there is no cause for the contamination or purification of people. The implication of this wrong view is that people act due to destiny or circumstances or character. The Buddha said that there is no moral responsibility if one murders because it is one's destiny to murder, or if one murders because circumstances forces one to murder, or if one murders because it is one's character to murder. This is wrong. A safe bet sutta was given to lay people who were uncertain about karma and uncertain about an afterlife. In this sutta, the Buddha's logic was, if one practices the Dharma, one leads a blameless life. Even if karma and the afterlife do not exist, one has not lost, because a blameless life is a reward without considering other factors. If there is karma in an afterlife, then one has won a double reward, the blamelessness of one's present life and the rewards in the afterlife. In other words, leading your life according to the law of karma is good for you, even if there's no natural universal moral law of karma. The 3 wrong views of karma that I have just listed were explained by the Buddha to be unsafe bets. So how did the Buddha define karma? It is intention that I call karma. For having willed, one acts by body, speech, or mind. The Buddha defined karma to mean intention or volition. Karma comes from the intention behind the action, intention behind speech, intention behind thought. Without intention, there is no bodily action, no verbal action, no mental action. The underlying intention defines the ethical quality of our bodily action, verbal action, and mental action. Karma determines the nature of our rebirth. This is opposed to the wrong view of there is no survival beyond death, no effects of good or bad deeds. Next, karma is a universal moral law, a law of nature. This is opposed to the wrong view of there is no natural universal moral law, only a man-made law. And finally, through heedlessness we contaminate ourselves, and by diligent effort we can purify ourselves. This is opposed to the wrong view of there is no cause for the contamination or purification of people. Here is another sutta in which the Buddha used a pragmatic argument to encourage lay people to live their lives according to the law of karma. Lay people should reflect. I wish to live. I do not wish to die. I desire happiness and I don't want to suffer. Since I wish to live, since I don't wish to die, since I desire happiness, and since I don't want to suffer, if someone were to take my life, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to me. In other words, I don't want to be killed. Now, if I were to take the life of another person, one who wishes to live, does not wish to die, desires happiness, and doesn't want to suffer, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to the other person either. What is displeasing and disagreeable to me is also displeasing and disagreeable to the other person. In other words, the other person doesn't want to be killed either. How can I inflict upon another person what is displeasing and disagreeable to me? Having reflected thus, you should abstain from the destruction of life, encourage others to abstain from the destruction of life, and speak in praise of abstinence from the destruction of life. So based on the principle of how can I do something to somebody else that I wouldn't want to have happen to me, I don't kill. I encourage others not to kill, and I praise the idea of abstaining from killing. All 3 of these are meritorious. Notice that the Buddha did not just talk about personal ethics. He also encouraged people to try to impact society by encouraging others not to kill and praising the idea of abstaining from killing. If someone were to take from me what I have not given, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to me. If someone were to commit adultery with my wife, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to me. If someone were to damage my welfare with false speech, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to me. So the sutta then repeats the same arguments for stealing, adultery, and lying. Each time, the Buddha did not talk about just personal ethics. He also encouraged people to try and impact society by encouraging others to not do wrong things and praising the idea of abstaining from doing wrong things. If someone were to divide me from my friends by slander, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to me. If someone were to address me with harsh speech, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to me. If someone were to address me with frivolous speech and idle chatter, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to me. The sutta continues to repeat the same argument for slander, harsh speech, and idle talk. Again, each time the Buddha did not just talk about personal ethics, he also encouraged people to try to impact society by encouraging others to not to do wrong things and praising the idea of abstaining from doing wrong things. The People of Bamboo Gate Sutta combines the golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you with the first 7 of the 10 actions, speech, and thoughts leading to an unfortunate rebirth as listed in the suttas. Killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, slander, harsh speech, idle talk, covetousness, ill will, and wrong view. The last 3 things on this list, covetousness, ill will, and wrong view, are not covered by this sutta because they are created by thought and therefore do not directly impact other people. However, according to the Buddha's teachings on karma, all 10 of these things can lead to an unfortunate rebirth. My talk on clearing up misconceptions about karma discusses these 10 things in more detail. One difference between this sutta and the traditional understanding of the Golden Rule is that the Buddha encouraged people to use this principle to impact society, not just as a guide for personal ethics. Now let's look at another sutta. What is bad? Killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, slander, harsh speech, idle talk, covetousness, ill will, and wrong view are bad. This list of 10 items shows up in many suttas. But how do we determine if something that is not on this list is bad? And what is at the root of a bad mind? Greed is at the root of a bad mind. Hatred is at the root of a bad mind. Delusion is at the root of a bad mind. This sutta explains that bad thoughts, bad speech, and bad actions have greed, hatred, or delusion at their root. Just as roots give strength and nourish a tree, so too greed, hatred, and delusion strengthen and nourish a bad mind. What is good? Abstaining from killing, abstaining from stealing, abstaining from sexual misconduct, abstaining from lying, abstaining from slander, abstaining from harsh speech, abstaining from idle talk, abstaining from covetousness, abstaining from ill will, and abstaining from wrong view are good. And what is the root of a good mind? Non-greed is at the root of a good mind. Non-greed includes generosity and contentment. Non-hatred is at the root of a good mind. Non-hatred includes loving kindness and patience. Non-delusion is at the root of a good mind. Wisdom is non-delusion. Actively abstaining from these 10 things is wholesome. In other suttas, it says that actively abstaining from these 10 things can lead to a fortunate rebirth as a human or in a deva realm. Actions, speech, or thoughts that are not on this list but have the roots of non-greed, non-hatred, or non-delusion are good. Being attached to the taste of my coffee is a type of greed. This is not going to cause an unfortunate rebirth, but it can have other bad effects. I am often asked, what is wrong with enjoying my coffee, being attached to my children, or enjoying my possessions? In the suttas, Mara is the personification of temptation. He sometimes appears to the Buddha or to a monk or to a nun to try and tempt them away from the spiritual path. Here is what the Buddha said when Mara talks about attachment to children and possessions. In this sutta, Mara says, "Those with children delight because of their children. Those with cattle delight because of their cows. A person's delight comes from possessions, since a person with no possessions doesn't delight." The Buddha replied, "Those with children grieve because of their children. Those with cattle grieve because of their cows. A person's grief comes from possessions, since a person with no possessions doesn't grieve." What the Buddha says is correct. Though my children and possessions provide me with temporary superficial delight, there is also the inherent fear of losing my children and fear of losing my possessions. There is unhappiness when I am separated from my children, and unhappiness when I am separated from my possessions. Monks must give up children and possessions, but the Buddha understood that lay people cannot be expected to give up their children or their possessions. The Buddha did not expect lay people to live like monks. This is why, as lay people, we have 5 precepts, while monks have 227 precepts. More about the precepts later. All people, including monks, suffer due to old age, sickness, and death. But lay people also suffer because of their attachment to their children and attachment to possessions. Let me now share with you a famous sutta. There were a group of people called the Kalamas who said to the Buddha, "Many holy men and ascetics pass through our village. Each expound their own teaching and criticize the teachings of others. How do we determine which teachings are good?" Actually, the Kalamas were confused regarding teachings regarding rebirth and karma. The Buddha replied, "It is understandable that you are confused and have doubt. Do not go by oral tradition, by lineage of teaching, by hearsay, by a collection of scriptures, by logical reasoning, by the seeming competence of a speaker, or because you think the monk is our teacher." In other words, the Buddha criticized blind faith. When you know for yourself that these qualities are bad, these qualities are blameworthy, these qualities are criticized by the wise, these qualities lead to harm and suffering, then you should abandon them. In other words, the Buddha is saying, rather than blind faith, use common sense as a starting point. The Buddha then continued using common sense to differentiate between good teachings and bad teachings. I'm paraphrasing the sutta a little here, but keeping the same meaning. When greed, hatred, or delusion arises in a person, is this bad? Is this blameworthy? Are these qualities criticized by the wise? Do these qualities lead to welfare or to harm? The Kalamas replied, "These qualities are bad, are blameworthy, are criticized by the wise, they lead to harm and suffering." In other words, the Buddha is saying that by using a common sense approach to morality, we can see that anything rooted in greed, hatred, or delusion is bad. The sutta then continues saying that anything rooted in non-greed, non-hatred, and non-delusion is good, blameless, praised by the wise, and leads to welfare and happiness. Once the Kalamas had accepted that greed, hatred, and delusion were bad, and that non-greed, non-hatred, and non-delusion were good, the Buddha used this to address the question of rebirth and karma. A person whose mind is free from hostility, free from ill will, uncontaminated and pure, can be confident of four things. First, if there is rebirth and karma, then after death I will reappear in the heavenly world. But if there is no rebirth and no karma, then in the present life I look after myself with ease, free from hostility, free from ill will, free from trouble. In other words, whether there is an afterlife or not, leading a moral life is beneficial. Third, if harm befalls an evildoer, in other words, there is karma, then I am safe from harm. Or if no harm befalls an evildoer and there's no karma, then I am still pure and happy. So whether there is a natural, universal law of karma or not, leading a moral life is beneficial. Harmony in any community depends on a shared commitment to ethical conduct. Morality is a foundation for harmony. I mentioned this at the beginning of the talk. In today's world, many people reject organized religion and are skeptical regarding claims of an afterlife. The Buddha used common sense to show that organized religion and belief in an afterlife was not necessary to have a shared commitment to ethical conduct. The Buddha encouraged people to abstain from doing wrong, encourage others to abstain from doing wrong, and speak in praise of abstinence from doing wrong. So the Buddha encouraged people to use moral principles to impact society, not just as a guide for personal ethics. The foundations for bad action, bad speech, and bad thought are in the mind. These foundations are greed, hatred, and delusion. These create bad karma and will have bad results. The foundations for good action, good speech, and good thought are also in the mind. These foundations are non-greed, generosity or contentment, non-hatred, loving kindness or patience, and non-delusion, wisdom. These create good karma and will have good result. This is the natural, universal moral law of karma. Before moving into the questions and answers portion, let me ask a fundamental question and then provide my own answer. How to create harmony with others, such as family members, co-workers, or members of society and so on, who are not Buddhist and may not prescribe to the Buddhist concept of right understanding. As mentioned in the earlier presentation, you need to start within your circle of influence, your own attitudes, speech, and behavior. If you want to have trust and harmony with others, you have to first work on your own core of trustworthiness and peace first. Since you are a Buddhist, you should use Buddhist principles, Buddhist jargon to do this internal work, starting with right understanding. It doesn't matter if others don't use the same jargon as you do. If both of you are trustworthy and peaceful, then harmony can easily be created. If you are very trustworthy and very peaceful, then you may be able to influence the other person to increase their level of trustworthiness and peacefulness. If the other person is fundamentally not trustworthy or not peaceful, then perhaps the Buddhist attitude of equanimity, not reacting with emotion, is the best possible outcome. Now is the time for questions and answers.